Light guns have become a relic of video game history, along with manuals, strategy guides, memory cards, and wired controllers. A lot of gamers associate light guns as being a CRT-only experience, and that's just how they were made. Back in those days, CRT televisions were the only televisions that we had. As far as light guns go, we really had it made in the late 1990s and early 2000s. Arcades always had a few light gun games such as House of the Dead and Time Crisis. Light guns have been an integral part of the video game console scene as far back as Duck Hunt on the original Nintendo, all the way up to titles such as Confidential Mission on the Sega Dreamcast and House of the Dead 3 on the original Xbox. Fast forward to today, and we've got much bigger displays that are really pretty ideal for a multiplayer light gun setup, but the problem is these older light guns just don't work with a modern display. The Nintendo Wii tried to implement quote-unquote light gun gameplay with their motion-controlled Wii remote, but accurate gameplay was a mixed bag. However, thanks to the Wii's sensor bar, we could at least use these remotes on a modern display. There have been a few attempts by various manufacturers to develop new light guns that are modern display compatible. Most of these things just aren't accurate at all. If these things aren't accurate, then they probably aren't worth using. Newer light guns have generally mixed reviews and bad reputations. When Stone Age Gamer approached me to see if I'd like to try out the new TimeBreaker light guns by Intec, I was a little skeptical but eager to get my hands on them. These things offer a few additions that other modern light gun manufacturers don't, and I was very curious to see just how far modern light guns have come along in recent years. Hey everyone, Travis Bowman here. I'm a fingerstyle guitar player and retro video game nerd. I'm actually going to go against the typical YouTuber clickbaity formula and go ahead and say right here at the beginning of this video that I really do like these light guns and they're actually pretty accurate for what they are. They are not 100% perfect, but they're pretty close. And if you want a light gun that just magically works without setup and tinkering, then you're going to be out of luck. These might not be for everyone, but light gun enthusiasts will definitely want to have a look. At the end of the day, I can say that I've really had a lot of fun with the TimeBreaker light guns, and if you don't mind doing a little bit of calibrating and perhaps even a hair of troubleshooting, then I think you will too. If you find yourself sold on these light guns at any point in this video, Stone Age Gamer would like to offer you a discount just for watching this video. You can find all of that information in the description below. This won't be my only review on these light guns. For this video, we're just going to unbox them, set them up, calibrate them, and use them on an HD display. We'll also talk about how they perform with a few specific games in both single player and multiplayer modes thanks to a few special guests. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the dedicated CRT video that I'll be uploading after this video is already out. Until then, let's unbox the Intec TimeBreaker light guns, fire up some old school shooters, and put these things through their paces. As we unbox these two TimeBreaker light guns, let's talk about their features and functions and how they actually work. These light guns come in just two colors, light blue and the old school Namco GunCon gray. These are wireless light guns that feature a rechargeable battery. In my experience, you'll wear out the muscles in your arms playing these games well before these guns need to recharge. Intec claims that these units are plug and play, and so far, they are designed to be used with the Sony PlayStation and PlayStation 2 only. The rumor is compatibility with other retro consoles are planned for the future. PS2 games are compatible with backwards compatible PlayStation 3 consoles, although I haven't tested out these games with my PS3 at all. All of the gameplay footage you'll see in this video is captured on either a legit Sony PS1 or PS2. Thanks to the infrared sensor bar, these light guns can be used with virtually any display that you can use the PS1 or PS2 on, including modern HDTVs and old school CRTs. The Wii sensor bar operated in pretty much the exact same way back in the day. My 50-inch LG OLED C1 is a pretty thin display, and I was worried about these sensors having enough room to hang off the top of it, but to my surprise, they actually work quite well and don't really get in the way of anything on the display itself. The guns themselves are not tethered to anything with wires. Each gun comes with its own set of wireless dongles. You've got the PlayStation controller style dongle for the PS1 and a USB dongle for use with your PS2. You won't need the PS1 style dongle for PS2 games. Those light guns work on the PS2 just with the USB dongle alone. If you have both consoles, it's pretty nice to have a dedicated dongle for each of them. This definitely beats having to unplug the dongle if you want to go back and forth between each console. Aesthetically, these guns are very satisfying to hold and look at, and I'm having a hard time picking a favorite color from the two. The light blue is really cool, but I also love that classic GunCon gray color. Which one do you think you'd grab first? First impressions of the box are kind of bad, to be honest. It looks like a cheap toy that you would find at Dollar General on the top shelf of the toy aisle. If you saw this box from a distance, you would assume that it probably is just a cheap toy. After reviewing several products here on YouTube, I've learned to never really judge anything by the box. It's what's inside the box that counts. The way these light guns work is actually really clever. I'm pretty sure they work very similarly to the Wii remotes. The sensor bars are powered and they hang on the top of your television. You don't have to plug the sensor bar into anything else related to your console or even the gun. All you have to worry about is plugging the USB cable from that sensor bar into a 5-volt USB power brick. You calibrate the guns and shoot at your TV. The sensor bar picks up where you shot and sends that information back to the gun, which in turn sends the information to the wireless dongle that's connected to the console. That's a lot of places to send this information, but it actually happens really quickly with pretty much no lag, and I've got to hand it to them, it's a really cool idea. The light gun features an on-off switch as well as 2 other mode switches. You can turn the recoil on and off, which is really just a burst of vibration. These guns don't actually push back or have any physical moving parts like the send-in light guns do. In addition to recoil, you've got an option to turn on rapid fire or single fire. Rapid fire seems to be dependent on the game that you're playing, and I don't think it works with every single game. We have an A and B button, as well as start and select on the sides of the gun. They've also included a stick on the back of the gun, as well as a vertical calibration wheel near the barrel, and 2 smaller buttons on the back that specifically deal with calibration, which we'll talk about more in depth in a little bit. We've got a really small sync button underneath the barrel of the gun to sync up with your wireless dongles. I'm happy to report that pairing these guns with their respective dongles is a very seamless experience. I haven't had any troubles pairing them, even with 2 different guns. The guns seem to know which dongle belongs to them respectively, which is nice. After I'm done playing, I turn the console and the TimeBreaker light gun off. Once I'm ready to play again, I turn the console and the gun back on and pull the trigger and boom, we're connected once again and we're ready to continue playing. Seamless pairing is a pretty big deal in my game room, and it's really great that these guns connect so easily. That's just one less thing to have to worry about. I'm also really excited to say that we've got a very large C button on the underside of the gun, around the same spot that you would expect to insert a clip or a magazine in a real gun. This button is pretty important for some of those PS2 Time Crisis-like games, but you can also use this button to reload in other games such as Vampire Knight. Shooting away from the screen is another way to reload just like you would expect, and as far as I know, there is no way to implement the C button in any of the PlayStation 1 light gun games, which kind of makes sense. The original GunCon didn't have this button either. As far as the feel of the guns, I can honestly say that they're just about the perfect weight and feel. The grips are long enough that my big monkey hands have no trouble hanging on to it. The plastic doesn't feel like there's a lot of give in it, and they've accomplished the lightweight feel without making it feel super cheap. The trigger on a light gun can make or break the entire experience, but thus far, this trigger is built very well, and it doesn't really hurt your index finger after nearly an hour of gameplay. The trigger itself isn't really difficult to pull, and pulling it several times in a row feels exactly how it should. The gun features lighted A and B buttons, and there's also a horizontal light dedicated to battery life and pairing status. Green means you're fully charged, and yellow means that the battery is starting to run low. Red is obviously the low battery light. During gameplay, I've never seen that red light myself. Then again, I always make it a point to charge all of my wireless controllers when I'm not currently using them. Intec highly recommends using an HDMI adapter if you're going to be playing on a modern display. This is where my setup will probably differ from yours. I went all in on my retro setup, and I paid for a very expensive RetroTink 4K upscaler. This lets me take high quality analog signals such as component and RGB from my retro consoles and upscales it via HDMI in 4K on my LG OLED C1. In addition to having a higher quality signal that has been upscaled to 4K, you can also inject HDR and even add scan lines. If you don't want to shell out nearly $1,000 for this high-quality upscaler, StoneAge Gamer sells a reputable HDMI adapter that works with both the PlayStation 1 and PS2 consoles. This adapter also upscales these consoles to 1080p, which is pretty nice. Thus far, I have not noticed any lag with this adapter, and I can say the same with my personal setup of SCART and component cables. Obviously, my very expensive RetroTink 4K looks a lot better than the HDMI adapter, but that being said, the adapter isn't bad. The manufacturer recommends using TVs 42 inches or larger for these light guns. Smaller displays will work, but they highly recommend using a larger TV, especially for 2-player action. I myself will be using this 50-inch LG C1 OLED for the entire review. Let's get these guns set up and ready to use. Once you open up the box, you'll have to assemble the gun. The gun is in 2 parts, the grip and the rest of it. Putting these together requires you to plug in a ribbon cable and insert 1 screw with the included Allen wrench. That's pretty much it. It was really easy and honestly kind of fun to do. I don't know why you would ever want to disassemble it, but doing so would be just as easy. In the box, you'll also find your 2 dedicated wireless dongles for the PlayStation 1 as well as the PlayStation 2, and you'll also find the sensor bar. There's a longer USB cable included to charge the gun when it's not in use. The sensor bars will need to be plugged into a USB power brick, and before you ask, yes, you can use 2 of these guns at the same time on both the PlayStation 1 and PS2. You just have to set up both sensor bars on your television, and they need to have their own dedicated USB power brick. They look kind of weird hanging out on top of the TV, but they don't overhang enough to be super distracting when you're trying to do something else, like play another game or watch a movie or something. I've played some intense Battlefield 6 since I put them up there, and I honestly forgot that they were there. So here's my first problem with these light guns. They want you to power the sensor bar, but they do not include a power brick in which to do so. They don't include a power brick to charge the guns themselves either. That's a strike against these things already. They claim that these are plug and play, but maybe their definition of plug and play differs from mine. When I hear that term, I assume that I have everything that I need to get started right out of the box. With the TimeBreaker light guns, that's simply not true. You cannot power the sensor bars without somewhere to plug this USB cable into, and without those power bricks, you can't use the light guns. I definitely would not rely on your TV's USB ports to power the sensor bars, and that's assuming that your TV even has USB ports. Not every single TV does. Nope, I had to search around my house for an extra USB power brick, which of course I did not have, because no one includes them with products that need to be powered anymore. So yeah, I had to buy them on Amazon and wait for them to come in the mail. I know that this is a business practice that has become all too common in the last few decades, but still, it would have been so much better if they included just one little USB power brick in this box. There's plenty of room to do so. After everything has been assembled and the dongles are in the appropriate console, it's time to plug in the sensor bar and slap it on top of your TV. I would not recommend placing these sensor bars anywhere else. I don't think they work quite like the original Wii sensor bar. Back then, you could choose to place that sensor either on top or underneath your television, but these light gun sensor bars are really only designed to be used on top of the TV. Now that everything is in order, it's time to calibrate the guns, and then we can get to shooting some bad guys. So here we are, the moment that we've all been waiting for. In order to use these guns accurately, you've got to calibrate them. This is either going to make or break these guns for most of you watching this video. The TimeBreaker guns actually have a pretty decent system of calibration. When you boot up a typical GunCon game, such as Time Crisis or really any other light gun game of that time, one of the first screens you're going to come across is this one. If you were using a normal GunCon light gun from the past, then you would just do what the screen is asking you to do. We're going to do that here as well, but we have a few extra steps with the TimeBreaker guns, but it's really not too bad. First, you need to point the gun at the center of the screen, just like the game is asking you to do. Then, you'll need to press in the stick on the back of the gun, like an R3/L3 press on your standard PlayStation controller. Once you've lined up the gun to the center of the screen with the stick pressed in, then you shoot. Your gun is now calibrated to the center of the screen, but we're not done just yet. Now we'll need to calibrate your corners. Keep in mind that most of these games will be displayed in a 4:3 format, not 16:9. Make sure you're aware of the black bars on the sides of the screen, and as far as the light gun is concerned, these black bars do not exist. You only want to be able to shoot the gameplay portion of the screen, and we'll need to calibrate the corners to reflect that. Below the stick, you've got 2 buttons that are dedicated to calibration. The left button calibrates the top left portion of the screen, and the right button calibrates the bottom right portion of the screen. To calibrate these corners, you need to hold the left button and shoot the top left of the screen, and do the same with the right button and the bottom right portion of the screen. These buttons essentially let the light gun know where out of bounds begins. If you calibrated these guns correctly, then you'll get a visual of what out of bounds looks like. There are small LEDs surrounding these calibration buttons, and if you go too far, they'll turn red. This works if you're going out of bounds in any direction, whether it's left and right or up and down. If you're pointing in the inbounds portion of the screen, then both lights will remain green, letting you know that you're exactly where you should be. Remember that your console thinks that this light gun is an original GunCon, but it's not. It's a good idea to calibrate your gun this way right before you start playing every single time. I know it seems like a lot, but once you get into the groove of doing this, it'll take you an extra 10 or 15 seconds at most. Because of the way that calibration is built into the guns themselves, you can always pause the game and recalibrate at pretty much any time. I found that staying in the same position really goes a long way with these light guns. If you move around too much, then you're likely going to have to recalibrate these guns more often than you might like. This is going to be a pretty standard setup if you've got a legit copy of whatever light gun game that you might want to play. However, if you've upgraded your retro console with an ODE, you're going to have yet another extra step. So let's briefly go over that. If you're really into retro video game consoles, then you might know about devices called ODEs, or optical drive emulators. These are devices that replace your aging disk drive with an SD card reader. Arguably, the most respected ODE for the original PlayStation is the X Station, which I have installed in my console. I also have a dedicated review video about this particular ODE. Once the console boots up, you're shown the X Station menu, which is basically a list of all the games that you have on the SD card. You scroll down to the game you want to play, press X, and then you're in the game and ready to start playing. If you plug in 2 TimeBreaker light guns into your PS1, that means you don't have a controller port for a regular controller anymore. You can scroll up and down the X Station menu using the A and B buttons on the TimeBreaker, but I haven't found a way to actually select and start a game with these guns alone. The triggers don't do it, and the start and select buttons don't as well. What I need is a simple X button press, and it doesn't look like these guns have that particular button mapped for this. What I've had to do for a single player experience is just leave a legit controller in the Player 2 port, and use that Player 2 controller to select and start whatever game I want. If I have another person that wants to play these light gun games with me on my PS1, then it gets a little more tedious. I'll just plug in a regular controller to port 2, select the game, and then unplug it. Then I will plug in the light gun dongle to port 2 after the game has been booted. I usually use wireless controllers with all of my consoles, but I would really highly discourage you from ever unplugging wireless dongles from your systems while they're currently turned on. If you end up doing that accidentally, you'll probably be okay, but I absolutely will not be taking that risk myself. I just don't want any reason to possibly short out anything in my video game consoles, and the X Station is kind of a finicky device, and it wasn't cheap. Stupid mistakes can end up costing a lot of money, and I know that firsthand from experience. The original PlayStation console has a few flaws, and one of those is most definitely the design of the power supply that's inside of the console. When the PS1 is plugged in, its power supply is constantly getting power sent to it whether the system itself is turned on or not, and I definitely try to keep that console unplugged until I'm actually ready to play a game on it. Even when the console has been turned off for days, you can feel a little bit of warmth on the left side of the console where the power supply is located. I recapped that power supply a long time ago, but still, I don't want to put any unnecessary stress on my consoles if I don't have to. Having to do these controller swaps because of the X Station is a bit of a pain, but honestly, it's really not that bad. Like everything else we've discussed so far, it's just a matter of muscle memory. Doing all these steps may seem like a lot, but I've done it several times now and it's really not that big of a deal. You won't have to worry about doing anything like this with the PlayStation 2, as you're not required to take up any of the controller ports while using these light guns. Those have dedicated USB dongles. I use the Defender wireless controller by Retro Fighters for both my PS1 and PS2, and I just leave that dongle in my PS2 and select the game I want to play for my hard drive when I want to use these light guns. So that pretty much covers all you'll need to know regarding setting up these light guns. So how do they perform? Let's check it out. Just like the original guns from back in the day, not every game uses them the same way. Let's talk about some of the games that I've played extensively for this review, starting with the PlayStation 1 and ending with the PlayStation 2. Time Crisis in the arcade often had a dedicated foot pedal that you would use to get behind cover. That game is designed to be used with the foot pedal, and that's what the game is all about. You only have a certain amount of quote-unquote time to kill enemies while trying not to get shot yourself. Since we don't have a foot pedal for the original PlayStation, we'll need a dedicated button to get behind cover instead. Fun fact about this game on the original PlayStation, if you're just playing this game by yourself, you can have a light gun plugged into player port 1 and a regular controller in player port 2. Literally stepping on any given face button on that player 2 controller will act as the foot pedal does, providing you with cover without having to press anything on the light gun. This admittedly barbaric method works with the TimeBreaker light guns too, but if you don't fancy yourself putting your nasty putrid feet on a controller that someone else might like to have their hands on, you'll have to either use the A or B button on the gun itself to get behind cover. This changes the usual preference of holding the light gun like an actual handgun into an SMG-like stance, holding the gun with your left hand instead of having both of your hands holding the grip. It actually works pretty decently, as long as you go into the game settings to change the cover button to be B instead of A. B is on the right side of the gun, so you can put the palm of your hand underneath the barrel and activate the B button with your index or middle finger. Using A for cover is not a good time. It always feels weird to try to use the left thumb to do this, and I just don't recommend it. Other than that, I've had a really great time using these TimeBreaker light guns with Time Crisis as well as Time Crisis Project Titan. Remember that Project Titan is actually a single player game only though. The point blank games really have no right being as fun as they are because they're just incredibly silly. However, when I have friends over, I think I prefer to play a game like this instead of your typical light gun shooter like Time Crisis. We are blessed with 3 separate point blank games on this system, being Point Blank 1, 2, and 3. I find myself enjoying 2 and 3 more than the first game, but that's probably just a preference thing. I feel as though these games got a little more refined with each iteration. These games were a joy to play during my testing, and I find that these games were integral to test accuracy with the light guns. As we're looking at my gameplay, you can see that I'm pretty accurate most of the time. The hard part about testing light gun games is this. These games were always pretty difficult. Some of the mini games in Point Blank are ridiculously hard, and they aren't sugarcoating that. You'll be straight up told what you're about to do is very hard or even insane as far as difficulty goes. Still, when the gun was calibrated correctly, I feel like the shots that I missed in this game were my fault and not the fault of the gun itself. Aiming down the sight like a real gun works some of the time, but it seems like your shots will either go a hair to the left or to the right of your target, so there's a bit of compensation that needs to take place. It's kind of hard to describe, but light guns of the past kind of operated in the same way. They were never 100% accurate. If you're fully expecting any light gun to shoot exactly where you're pointing your sight at all times, then you're probably going to be a little disappointed. The Point Blank games go a long way in helping you with that learning curve. A lot of us have really fond memories of playing Time Crisis 2 at arcades and pizza places in the early 2000s. Unfortunately, the second player experience of Time Crisis 2 and Time Crisis 3 on home consoles is pretty abysmal, as you can likely tell from this footage. Instead of both of you being on the same screen, you now have to split the screen in half. The aspect ratio really does not do this split any favors, and it's just too damn small, even on a 50-inch TV. My buddy Jonathan played through some of this one with me, and we both had a pretty bad time. It was really difficult to tell whether the guns were acting up or if it was just the game. I'd say the game itself is pretty bad for a two-player experience because I did pretty okay by myself in this game earlier that day. Other games that we tried were a lot better than this. I'm blaming it on the split screen aspect. The screens become just a little too small to hit targets that are even just a little far away, even on my 50-inch screen. If you're wanting a two-player experience on the PlayStation 2, then we probably should look at a few other games because Time Crisis 2 and 3 really kind of suck. However, playing these games in single player is actually a blast. I really like the mechanic of being able to switch weapons out in Time Crisis 3 by simply pulling the trigger when you're not pointed at the screen. That adds a lot of depth to the gameplay, and I'm pretty excited to check out more of that game in single player mode. Vampire Knight is a ridiculous game from Sega. It plays like your typical light gun game, only this time we actually have one large screen to share between two players. No more split screen. This one does a really decent job at showing you where your shots are landing as you're shooting. This is probably a good first choice for a two-player game just for that reason. You've got a flash of red or blue depending on which character you are. We ended up playing through this one together for quite some time until we lost too many lives to continue. Remember that light gun games have always been designed to be difficult, so you have to put in as many quarters as possible to keep playing until the end. On console, you just have to practice enough to not make as many mistakes. The TimeBreaker did a really good job with this game, and I'd honestly love to continue playing it. Maybe I should do a Vampire Knight live stream one weekend. Ninja Assault plays a lot like Vampire Knight, but my god, is this game difficult. I even put the difficulty setting on very easy like a little girl. Still, the enemies show up incredibly fast and you don't have a big enough window to shoot them before they attack you. I made the mistake of trying this game first on the PS2 and I definitely shouldn't have. I can't recommend this one unless you want a light gun game that requires you to die quite a bit as you're learning where the enemies show up. I felt it was pretty important to jot down the thoughts of my Player 2 companions that tried these TimeBreaker light guns with me. Getting a second or even third opinion on these new light guns might help all of you get a different perspective on them. I had my best friend Jonathan and my girlfriend Emily try them out with me. Jonathan is a video game veteran just like me, and Emily grew up with a very specific genre of video games. So let's jump into the gameplay and get their overall thoughts on the TimeBreaker guns, starting with Emily. Like I said, Emily's my girlfriend, and over the last few years I've introduced her into several different retro video games. We generally like to play more grindy or cozy games together, such as Phantasy Star Online, Mega Bonk, Stardew Valley, and most recently, Tamagotchi Life on the Switch. This is the first time that she's used what would commonly be referred to as a light gun, although she grew up playing video games on the Wii, and she's no stranger to using infrared remotes with a sensor bar. I asked Emily to give me her opinions about these light guns, and this is what she had to say. She said that calibration took a minute for her to figure out, but after a few sessions, calibrating the guns were pretty easy. She definitely had more fun with Point Blank, especially when compared to Time Crisis. Emily preferred standing instead of sitting. Sitting was the most uncomfortable position for her with these light guns, as you can tell in this footage. Emily also claimed that aiming is kind of weird. She wanted to aim down the sights and use one eye, like you would if you were trying to be very precise with an actual gun. Overall, she feels as though she was a lot more accurate using both eyes and, for lack of a better term, just eyeballing it instead of aiming down the sights. I'll have to agree with her on that one. Ironically, not taking it super seriously will likely make you more accurate, but you've got to get a feel for aiming like this before you get used to it. Although she doesn't have a ton of experience with actual light guns from this era, or in arcades for that matter, she was very nostalgic for the Wii when playing with these light guns. She said that sometimes having to calibrate the light guns in the game nearly ruined the fun, but once you get it calibrated right and stay in the right position, it worked just fine. Overall, Emily's experience with the TimeBreaker light guns could be described as 70% fun and 30% frustration. She said she would love to try these out again, and I'm honestly kind of happy to hear that, because we had a lot of fun with these things together. Jonathan has been my best friend since first grade. He's a big PC gamer, and he mostly plays video games with a mouse and keyboard these days. Still, Jonathan and I have an extensive history of going to pizza places and arcades, and dumping several of our parents' quarters into Time Crisis and House of the Dead arcade machines. The last time we did something like that together was probably around 2006 or 7 or so. I myself have been messing around with the GunCon light guns quite a bit since then. Jonathan did not like the experience of these light guns at all. He kept getting very frustrated at the fact that his shots were not landing exactly where his gun was pointed. We were trying to troubleshoot as we were getting footage of all the games that we played together. But keep in mind that every time that we were shooting video of 2 players, I had some studio lights pointing at us to get decent lighting. These LED lights might have had some effect on the guns depending on where they were pointing. As you can see in this footage, I eventually asked Jonathan to switch places and guns with me to see if I was having the same issues that he was. Honestly, I was doing pretty well with both guns and positions. Jonathan only spent about 45 minutes with these guns, and maybe his calibration wasn't as good as it could have been. I'm noticing in the footage that he also seemed to only use one hand most of the time with these guns, and that might have been a factor as well. After asking Jonathan what he thought about the experience a few days later, he said that he would like to try it again and feels that maybe we were a little too far away from the TV. I've always used these light guns in the position that you're seeing in this footage, and I never thought to get any closer because we're currently right behind my couch. I suppose we could give sitting on the couch itself a try, but then again, I didn't have that much trouble at all with these guns when we were behind the couch. Oddly enough, we seemed to have the best time with Vampire Knight as we were sitting down. This was definitely not the most comfortable way to use the light guns, but then again, they're light guns. Standing with your arms out will get pretty tiring very quickly. Still, we definitely had the most fun and did the best in this game in the sitting position. Now let's talk about my experience with the TimeBreaker light guns and get my final thoughts on them. Overall, I still really do like these light guns, and I had a blast with them both by myself and playing with Jonathan and Emily. I'm wondering if these things might be a little finicky when both of them are being used at the same time though. When playing by myself and making sure to stay in the same position, I didn't really have any accuracy issues. I particularly had a great time with Time Crisis Project Titan on the PS1. This is a single player only light gun game, and holding the gun like you would a smaller submachine gun is definitely the way to go. It's a damn shame that the PS2 iterations of Time Crisis do so poorly in a multiplayer environment, because they actually feel and play really great in single player. You might be watching this video and find yourself saying that these light guns may not be worth it because of the calibration, but let me remind you that these guns are wireless, and most of the time I actually did find myself with a pretty accurate calibration. Admittedly though, there were times that I found myself not hitting my shots at all mid-game. Then again, I probably moved around just a little too much. This is what I was talking about at the beginning of this video. These things are not a one and done solution that works 100% every single time. You have to mess with them every now and then. That sort of thing doesn't really bother me at all, as I'm already a habitual tinkerer, but you might not feel the same way. Whenever a problem would show up while using these light guns, I would just recalibrate and then the experience would get better. Having these calibration buttons on the guns themselves are definitely a modern upgrade to light guns. With the older light guns, you'd have to go all the way back to the main menu and then get into the options screen to recalibrate your guns, assuming that you can even make it that far if your guns are acting up. With the TimeBreaker, all you have to do is pause the game if you want to recalibrate. I can honestly say that if you're a fan of light guns in general, then you're likely going to have a really good time with these things. If you've got a PS1 or PS2 console or both, then these light guns would make a great addition to that collection. If anything, these light guns would be a great excuse to get your friends over for some couch co-op style gaming again. When's the last time you had some of your buddies over for a retro video game night? However, if you find yourself getting easily frustrated with technology in general, then you might want to pass on them. There is a learning curve with the TimeBreaker light guns, and I found that they're just a hair different from the GunCon guns of the original golden age of light guns. As for me personally, these light guns are going to replace my GunCons for the PS1 and PS2. Having a wireless solution for light guns is a huge plus for me, as I have over 20 video game consoles hooked up with a few different PVMs scattered throughout my game room. If I wanted to use the original GunCons, I'd have to sit pretty close to the PVM and have these guns wired into my PlayStation systems. There's just not enough room to sit 2 people comfortably in that part of my game room. I'm not done reviewing these light guns just yet. I would still like to make a dedicated video on how these perform with CRTs specifically. If you're a fan of my channel, then you're likely familiar with my Teenagers Play Retro Console series. I'm thinking we're going to have some of those teenagers come back to check out these TimeBreaker guns. I think it would be pretty interesting to get the perspective of the younger generation, don't you think? Let me know what you guys think about these TimeBreaker light guns. Would you consider giving these a try, or are light guns better left in the past? If you end up picking these up, be sure to use my discount code in the description below. Huge thank you to the guys at Stone Age Gamer for sending me these TimeBreaker light guns for review, and as always, Kanoko Cat really appreciates the box. Thank you so much for watching this video and for subscribing, and I'll catch you guys at the very next review video. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.